Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 2480 BCE, and you're barefoot in the sand. No alarm, no buzzing phone, just silence. Well, almost silence. There's the hiss of the wind, sliding like a blade across the dunes, and the slow, rhythmic groan of stone cooling under nightfall. But no voices. Not anymore. The city of Memphis is sleeping, or maybe just pretending to be dead. You're not sure which is more unsettling. You sit up slowly, brushing grit from your skin. The moon hangs above you, impossibly large. It isn't kind. It doesn't smile. It simply stares, pale and round like the eye of a god long forgotten, but still watching. A moon that saw the first pharaoh bleed into sand and never blinked. You taste metal in your mouth. Blood? No, dust. But old dust. Royal dust. Dust that once belonged to men with names carved deep into stone and deeper still into fear. You spit it out. It comes back with the next breath. That's Saqqara for you. It never lets you forget where you are. Ahead of you, rising like a stairway abandoned by the sky, is the Step Pyramid. The first one, older than the Giza giants. Cruder, sure, but hungrier somehow. This one wasn't built for majesty. It was built for permanence. Like it knew sand would try to erase it and dare it to try. You stand slowly. The sand shifts beneath your feet like something alive. You're in a necropolis, not a graveyard. No, that would be too gentle. This place is different. Saqqara is where death came to be choreographed, where kings rehearsed eternity, where even the air has memorized the rituals. And yet, it doesn't feel like a place of death. Not entirely. There's a warmth in the breeze, as if the dead here never fully accepted the whole dying thing. As if they agreed to lie still, but only for a while. You begin to walk. Each step is a negotiation. Your soles ache. There are no Egyptian cotton sandals here. Just stone shards, thorns, and the uncomfortable intimacy of the earth pressing back against your body. You pass broken columns, weathered carvings, and what might have once been a temple or a bakery. Hard to tell. In Saqqara, everything holy and everything human has crumbled into the same color. Beige. There's a scent in the air. You inhale cautiously. It's sweet? No, not exactly. Sweet like decay under perfume. Sweet like time rotting in a jar of honey. Somewhere nearby, someone once burned myrrh. You can still smell the echo of it. The ghosts here are fragrant. And then, there it is. A sound. A soft, low hum. Not mechanical. Organic. Vibrational. It isn't outside you. It's under your ribs. As if the pyramid ahead is singing. Just low enough for the living to miss, but loud enough for the bones to dance. You stop walking, because suddenly you feel seen. Not in the cute, self-aware, social media way. No, in a divine judgment kind of way. Like your body just entered a space designed to weigh your soul, like an avocado in a marketplace. You're not ready. You were never meant to be. But the moon does not care. The wind does not care. The stone does not care. You were summoned. That much is clear. The tombs don't open for just anyone. And Saqqara, well, Saqqara does not do casual invitations. So you keep walking. Because it's too late to go back. Because your name has already been whispered in a language your lungs don't speak. And because, somewhere in the dark, something older than gods is waiting to meet you. No milk. No phone. Just you, your heartbeat, and the dead. Let's be clear. You're not in a city. Cities are noisy, smelly, full of people who bump into you and apologize with their eyes, but not their mouths. Cities are about movement, clattering hooves, collapsing carts, voices bartering over onions. But here, nothing moves, nothing breathes, not in a way you remember, and no one's selling onions. This isn't a city. It's a necropolis, city of the dead. They called it, though calling this place a city feels like calling the ocean a puddle. You're standing in something vast, stretched, timeless, and very, very still. Saqqara doesn't buzz like Cairo. It resonates. It's a low, ever-present hum of stone against memory. You don't hear it in your ears. You hear it in your joints, your teeth, the part of your body where secrets settle, the rib cage, maybe, or the liver. The moonlight helps you see just enough to doubt what you're seeing. A half-buried statue of a god with a falcon's head. A broken doorway leading nowhere. A stone basin filled with sand, shaped perfectly for someone to kneel beside. Or in the silhouette of the step pyramid. Too geometric to be natural, too crude to be modern, and far too stubborn to collapse. And the silence. It's not empty. It's full of rituals and regrets, full of footsteps that aren't yours, full of eyes that once watched kings descend into the ground, believing they were rising to the stars. You begin to understand something heavy. The people who built this didn't build it for you. They didn't even build it for the living. They built it for what comes after. And that makes you the intruder. You pass the remnants of walls that once guarded priests. Not soldiers, not citizens. Just priests. Men with shaved heads and blood under their fingernails. They were the architects of eternity. And you can still smell their work. The sour tang of natron, of lie and death preserved in perfection. The scent of decay arrested at its peak. The perfume of ego and incense. And then there's the sand. Oh, the sand. It gets everywhere, doesn't it? Between your toes, in your nose, under your nails. But here, it feels deliberate. It's not just sand. It's memory in powder form. Every grain might once have been part of someone's skull, or a toe, or the wall of a sacred tomb. You try not to think about that. You fail. You pass something that might have once been a shrine. The carvings are so whether they look like whispers. A name, perhaps. A prayer. Or a threat. The necropolis doesn't differentiate between those. You feel it now. The weight of it. The knowledge that you're walking through a place where time itself was choreographed. Where every stone had meaning. Every wall had direction. You were standing in an ancient algorithm. But instead of code, it's limestone and belief. And then you ask the question everyone asks when they come here. Why so much effort for the dead? You laugh a little to yourself. Not because it's funny, but because it's insane. Miles of tunnels, dozens of pyramids, thousands of bodies wrapped and boxed like divine leftovers. Why? Why the obsession? Some say it was fear. Some say it was hope. But deep down, it was about control. The Egyptians didn't trust death. So they tried to manage it. Like a tyrant micromanaging his own funeral. And yet, here you are, alive, breathing, with sand in your shoes and questions in your chest. And all this grandeur was not built for you. But that doesn't mean you're unwelcome. Not yet. Somewhere beneath your feet, a body lies curled in cloth, surrounded by gold and garlic and silence. And if the moon weren't watching, you might swear you just felt it shift. Just a little. He was a king, or a god, or a rumor dressed in linen. You've seen pyramids before, maybe on postcards, maybe in documentaries narrated by soft British accents. But nothing quite prepares you for standing in front of one. Not the famous kind, sleek and sharp and over-photographed, but the first one, the awkward ancestor, the prototype, the step pyramid of Djoser. It doesn't rise, not the way you expect. It stacks, 6 flat platforms of stone, one on top of the other like someone was building heaven with leftovers and forgot how triangles work. It's beautiful, in a way fossils are beautiful. Not for perfection, but for what they almost became. This isn't just a pile of rocks. It's where architecture became prophecy. Before this, the dead were buried beneath sand and clay roofs. Hidden. Simple. But this was audacity in limestone. A statement not to the gods, but above them, We too can make eternity. And the man behind it? Not Djoser. Not really. Djoser was the name on the door, yes. The body in the box. But the hands that shaped this monolith belonged to someone else. A name whispered across millennia like a spell you're not sure how to pronounce. Imhotep. Not a king. Not a warrior. Not divine. At least not when he was alive. Just a man. A priest. A scribe. A physician. An architect. A polymath in sandals. But more importantly, a dreamer. They say Imhotep looked at death and saw opportunity. While others saw silence, he heard systems, equations, angles. He believed that if the soul needed to ascend, the body needed stairs. So he built them. You walk closer to the pyramid, the wind curling around your ankles like a warning. The stone is pale, sun-bleached, but coarse. A million tiny pits where sand has kissed it for over 4,000 years. You place your palm on the surface. It's warm, not just from the sun, but from memory. And yes, it whispers. Not in words, exactly. In textures. You feel the indentations where chisel met stone, again and again, by hand, by will. Hundreds of workers sweating, bleeding, dying, just to build the vessel for one man's afterlife. The absurdity of it all buzzes under your skin. You laugh under your breath, because somewhere you once read that Djoser ruled for 20 years. But his tomb took 33. Only in Egypt can a man die in a house that wasn't finished while he was alive. But perhaps that was the point, because this tomb wasn't for him. Not really. It was for what he represented. Order, power, divinity. He was a prototype too, the first pharaoh to be embalmed, entombed, enshrined in such theatrical permanence. And the pyramid? It was a stage. A theater of stone where the performance never ends, where the lead actor lies beneath your feet, face wrapped in linen, ribs filled with resin and spells, waiting for applause from a god who never arrives. You step back, finally understanding what you're really looking at. Not a building, a belief. In stone, in continuity, in the idea that the body, if preserved well enough, could trick death into negotiating. You walk around the base, past crumbling walls and false doors. Those sacred slabs carved with images of daily life, so the dead could pretend, in some afterrealm, that they were still brushing their hair, or drinking wine, or yelling at their grandchildren. And you wonder, what did Djoser really believe? Did he imagine himself rising into the stars? Or did he fear worms more than gods? Was this monument born from faith or insecurity? After all, only the frightened build tombs this loud. And still something about it holds you. Because as ridiculous as it is, this tower of death, these buried dreams, you get it. You understand the urge to leave a mark, to outlive your heartbeat, to build something that might remember you when your bones no longer do. And so you stand before it, small, mortal, sand-dusted, and the pyramid doesn't mock you. It waits, because here in Saqqara, time is not a river. It is a circle, and the stones are always ready for the next whisper, even if it comes from you. It's a door, but not for you, not for the living. You see it before you feel it. A perfectly rectangular slab of stone, framed in low-relief carvings, delicate, hieroglyphic, severe. It doesn't look like much at first. In fact, it looks absurdly ordinary, like a poorly drawn fireplace or the side of a sarcophagus someone forgot to finish. But as you approach, the air changes. Heavier, thicker, cooler, somehow, despite the Egyptian night, still holding warmth like a fever in its breath. You reach out, slowly, cautiously, like something inside you knows you're crossing a line. Not physically, but spiritually. Your fingertips meet stone. Rough, cold, smooth in places, jagged in others. It doesn't move, of course. You didn't expect it to, but still, part of you hoped it might. This is a false door. And here, in ancient Egypt, that meant something very real. Because this wasn't for the eyes or the body. This was a threshold between worlds, between breath and stillness, between yesterday and forever. To you, it's solid. To the dead, it was open. The ancient Egyptians believed the soul, the Ka, the essential life force, needed a way to come and go, to pass between the eternal silence of the tomb and the remembered chaos of the world above. And so they carved doors, not to walk through, but to exist through. This one belongs to a priest. You can tell from the inscriptions. The little seated figure receiving bread. The symbols for incense, meat, beer, linen. A shopping list for eternity. Because the dead had appetites, too. You study the carved offerings. Oxen legs, fat geese, loaves of bread tall as forearms. It looks almost comical, as if the priest, lying mummified in his limestone cocoon beneath your feet, was preparing not for spiritual transcendence, but for a particularly aggressive picnic. But it mattered, because in their world, forgetting to feed the dead was like forgetting to breathe, an unthinkable terminal error. And so every morning, real food was placed before this false door, in solemn ritual, as if the calm might reach out, invisible fingers snatching bites from thin air. You wonder, did they ever feel it? A shift in a room? A breeze where there should be none? A sense that something took? You kneel, not in reverence, not yet, more out of curiosity, because something about this door, this silent, absurd slab, asks for something from you. Not a prayer, not even belief, just attention. You look closer at the cracks in the stone, at the worn edges where centuries of air, insects, humidity, and yes, hands have kissed it down to softness. Someone, or many someones, has touched this before you. Maybe with reverence, maybe with terror, maybe just to feel something eternal, however temporary. And then you see it, a smear, tiny, faint, red-brown. Blood? No, don't be ridiculous. Except why not? The ancients believed in activation, that words, symbols, doors, even bodies were useless until imbued with life. Sometimes that meant prayers, sometimes incense, and sometimes, yes, it meant blood. Your breath catches, because for a moment, you don't feel alone. Not in the creepy, haunted way, but in the deeper, more unnerving sense, the feeling of being watched by history itself. As if the past were not behind you, but around you, dense and thick and listening. And this door, it's not a relic, it's a boundary. You imagine pressing your entire body against it, closing your eyes, whispering a name not your own, hoping the stone will remember it, will recognize you, will open in some unseen way. And who's to say it wouldn't? Because in Saqqara, logic is a foreign language. Here, reality is ritual. And every stone, every carving, every false door is a conversation. Not between people, but between worlds. Between the breathless dead and the gasping living. Between bone and memory. You rise slowly. Dust clings to your palms. You don't brush it off. It feels earned. You take a step back, one last look at the door. It hasn't moved. Of course not. It never will. But it doesn't have to, because now you've crossed it, and nothing in you feels quite the same. It's not just dust. It's kings, queens, slaves, scorpions, mistakes. You didn't come here for the dust. No one ever does. But the dust came for you. You feel it first in your nose. Not a smell, exactly, but a presence. A dryness so complete it doesn't just sit in your nostrils, it etches them. Then your throat, parched, scratchy, like someone lined it with linen and forgot to rinse. You try to cough. You succeed. And suddenly, it's everywhere. 1,000 motes of ancient skin, fractured stone, forgotten spices, crushed beetles, pollen from long-dead flowers, and bone powder, all of it rising in a lazy cloud, wrapping you like a lover with dry hands. This isn't dust. It's history in particulate form. You blink. Hard. Your eyelashes grind together like sandpaper. There's grit in your eyes now. Behind them. In them. You see the world through a veil the color of time. Faded ochre, charred gold, ceremonial beige. This is the dust of Saqqara. Not the kind you wipe from shelf. The kind you inhale and never fully exhale. And make no mistake, this dust is alive. Not with bacteria or mites. No, not like that. Alive with memory. It remembers sandals and sandals and sandals again. It remembers the slap of papyrus against stone, the hiss of linen across flesh. It remembers footsteps, thousands of them, shuffling down corridors that haven't seen light in 4,000 years. You kneel, your fingers trailing across the dry, cracked ground. The layer is thick, not fluffy like desert sand. Dense, fine, almost greasy with age. You pick up a pinch between your fingers. It sticks to your skin, refuses to fall. Somewhere inside this clump of tan nothingness, there might be the flaked skin of a servant who once carried papyrus scrolls, or the crumbled vertebra of a scribe who misspelled a god's name and vanished, or the powdered tooth of a princess who never saw adulthood. Yes, people are in this dust. So are gods. So are secrets. The ancient Egyptians had a word, kaibit, the shadow self, the echo of your being, the parts that linger. In Saqqara, the dust is kaibit incarnate, the residue of things that should have vanished but chose not to, and now they've found your lips. The grit coats your teeth. It's in your ears, in your scalp, in the folds of your clothing. The dust doesn't just settle on you. It claims you. You weren't meant to leave clean. You look around. The structures are half swallowed in this fine ash of ages. Walls meant to outlast empires, now coughing themselves into powder. Every breeze peels away another layer, like time exfoliating itself, exposing not the future, but more and more past. You walk forward again, and with every step, the dust rises slightly, a subtle, quiet rebellion against your intrusion. You're not just stirring air, you're stirring memory. Somewhere behind you, your footprints collapse in on themselves. Erased, as if you'd never been here. As if the dust, the true ruler of Saqqara, disapproves of your presence. You stop to examine the corner of a crumbling limestone wall. It's low, maybe once part an outer chamber. The carvings are faint. A falcon, a basket, a symbol for forever that looks suspiciously like an elbow bent the wrong way. You brush gently at the edge of it. The dust clouds, the wall flakes, and just like that, a century vanishes beneath your thumb. It's exhilarating and horrifying because suddenly you understand something that every archaeologist either accepts or runs from. To touch the past is to destroy it. To uncover is to unravel. To dig is to disturb. And dust is resistance. The final defense mechanism of history. A quiet, clinging reminder that not everything wants to be remembered. Some memories, some truths, want only to dissolve. You feel it coating your lungs now. You swallow. It scratches on the way down. That's royal dust, you tell yourself. Your body is becoming a museum of microscopic pharaohs. The absurdity hits you like heat. You laugh. It comes out as a cough. And the dust, the ancient, patient, all-knowing dust, rises just slightly as if amused. You stand again. The moon above is dimmer now. Or maybe your eyes it is cloudy. Either way, the world feels further away. And Saqqara, closer. Smell that? That's myrrh or rotting linen. Hard to tell. let's not pretend you came here expecting this. You thought Saqqara would be visual, a spectacle of crumbling pyramids and fading hieroglyphs, all seen through the noble lens of history documentaries and tourist fantasies. You thought it would be about what you could see, but you were wrong. This place is for the nose, and you realize that now, too late of course, as the smell grips you by the throat like an old hand with nowhere better to be. It's sweet, at first, sickly sweet, like honey left too long in the sun, or fruit that died beautiful but decomposed politely. But beneath that, there's a saltiness, a dry sting, the unmistakable tang of preservation. You just walked into the embalming court, and your body knows it before your mind catches up. Because the air here isn't air. It's chemical theology. It's perfume and putrefaction waging quiet war. You stop moving, because your instincts, your very bones, tell you that moving too quickly in this place might wake something. Not a ghost, no. Worse, a ritual. This isn't a chamber for prayer. This isn't a temple of light and silence. This is a workshop, and it stinks of faith in flesh. You see the stone slabs, wide, flat, slightly concave, stained with the memory of thousands of bodies that were once laid bare and sliced open beneath priestly hands. No blood now, of course. That's long gone. But the memory of blood lingers. It always does. Nearby, the remains of alabaster jars, some whole, some shattered, lie clustered like a forgotten constellation. These once held the sacred unmentionables: lungs, liver, intestines, stomach, carefully removed, lovingly packed, sealed in oil and prayer. The heart? That was different. The heart mattered. It had to be weighed, not by a priest, but by a god. Anubis, with his jackal head and his merciless scales. If your heart was too heavy with sin, it would be devoured by a demon with the body of a lion and the face of not again. You imagine standing there, your own heart twitching in your chest like it knows it wouldn't pass. The scent in the room deepens. It's now resinous, thick, the smell of burned trees and sacred decisions. This is myrrh, or frankincense, or maybe cedar oil, long dried and now revived by your very presence. You inhale it like punishment. It wraps itself inside you, coils through your lungs, nestles in your brain. It's intoxicating, not in a romantic, candlelit way, in the way of old temples and locked rooms and promises whispered in dead languages. And then you notice the stains, dark, reddish-brown streaks along the stone, like someone dragged a memory across it. A priest, a wife, a child, all of them soaked in ritual, weeping into linens they wouldn't live to wear. The walls here are lined with shelves carved from the stone itself. No wood in sight. The shelves are shallow, but wide enough for bowls, flasks, and knives. So many knives. Bronze mostly. Some still sharp. There are hooks, too. Long ones. Curved like questions you don't want answered. You wonder which one was used to scoop the brains from the skull through the nose. You wonder who held the skull. You wonder who mourned and who just watched, arms crossed, hoping their own turn came with more dignity. And yet, it was sacred. That's the thing. For us, this would be grotesque, morbid, the stuff of horror films and morbid fascination. But for them, this was the pinnacle of devotion, the highest act of love. To prepare someone for the afterlife was to preserve their dignity eternally, to wash their body in oils, to anoint them with perfumes, to wrap them, limb by limb, in linen soaked with prayers. It was part funeral, part surgery, part symphony, and the scent, this heavy, invasive perfume of time, was both mask and message. A way to smother death, to replace the odor of decay with something divine. But decay never really loses. It just waits, and you smell it now, just beneath the perfume, Just beneath the sacred varnish of ritual, there's rot. Subtle, sour, sad. You turn slowly. There's a bundle in the corner. Shapeless, wrapped, covered in dust. Maybe a linen roll left behind. Maybe more. You don't go closer. You don't want to. You've learned enough. The embalming court is not for the eyes. Not for the curious. It's for the faithful, the desperate, the ones who believe that what we smell at the end is what we become. You step backward slowly, respectfully, and as you do, the scent changes again, softer now, more distant, as if the court has decided you're no longer worth the effort. You breathe out. It tastes like copper, and you understand. You won't forget this place, because even when you wash, the smell will stay. Darkness in Saqqara isn't absence. It's presence. You've stepped into corridors now. Stone on all sides. Stone above. Stone beneath. And not the kind of stone that gives way. The kind that swallows. There's no light here. Not real light. Only the faintest silver echoes of moonlight leaking in from cracks so old they've forgotten what they were trying to divide. You raise a torch. Yes, a torch. Fire. Ancient light for an ancient place. Flashlights do not belong here. Batteries die, but flame negotiates. The glow is soft at first, licking the walls with lazy gold. The stone drinks it in, greedily, silently. The deeper you go, the more the shadows stop running. They linger now. They sit with you. The path narrows. You have to turn your body slightly to fit through. And then you feel it. A change in temperature. The air thickens. Not hotter, not colder. Just denser. Like breathing in syrup. Like the molecules here have grown tired of moving and now just hover, waiting to be remembered. And you wonder, is this darkness natural? Or was it designed? Because the ancient Egyptians, they weren't primitive. They weren't accidental. Every inch of these corridors was drawn, measured, planned. The darkness wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. A spiritual architecture of light and shadow. A test maybe for the Ka. For you. You reach a chamber, or what might have been one. The space opens just enough for you to turn around. The walls press in close, but they rise far above your head. You shine your torch upward, and for the first time in a while, you wish you hadn't. Because above you on the ceiling, there are faces, carved, painted, faded, eyes that do not blink but watch, lips that do not speak but judge. Some are human, others are not. A falcon with gold rings for eyes, a lion with the mouth of a man, a woman with stars instead of hair. These are gods, yes, but not the gentle kind. These are gods of transition, gods of the threshold, the ones who sit between breath and silence, holding scales and knives and time itself. You lower the torch. You've seen enough of their expressions, but the darkness now, it feels closer, as if seeing the ceiling gave the chamber permission to settle into you. You step forward again. Each footfall echoes, but not in a satisfying way. It doesn't bounce. It sinks. This is not echo for the sake of sound. This is echo as reminder that someone or something is listening. And in this tomb, silence is not passive. It's not the absence of noise. It's the presence of stillness. You think of the bodies once carried through here, wrapped, oiled, weeping linen trailing behind like a bride of eternity. You picture the pallbearers sweating under the weight, not of the dead, but of expectation. Because this was not just a hallway. This was a passage between realities. The priests chanted as they walked. They whispered spells meant to pin the soul in place. They burned incense until the air turned solid with meaning. Their voices echoed off the stone, layering over centuries of other voices, creating a kind of vocal sediment. And now you walk on it, every step pressing deeper into a symphony of funerals. You reach another door, not false this time, but not friendly either. It's low, you have to duck. Intentionally humiliating, perhaps. A reminder that even the living must bow in the house of the dead. You pass through, and now the darkness is total. Not metaphorical, not poetic, total. Your torch flickers, and for a terrifying second, it dies. Not from wind. There is no wind, but from something. And you stand there, breathless, blind, waiting. This is when the mind betrays you, because in the dark, your senses invent. You feel a hand brushing your shoulder. You hear a footstep behind you. You smell something floral and wet, like lilies left too long in a sealed room. And the darkness, this designed darkness, begins to speak, not with words, but with memory. It whispers everything you didn't ask. It hums regrets into your spine. It reminds you of your skin. It teaches you fear in a language older than language. You are no longer a visitor. You are an ingredient, a part of the story, a piece of the ritual, and only when the torch sputters back to life. A low orange hiss. Do you realize you've stopped breathing? You're not lost, but you're not quite you either. Because in Saqqara, the dark doesn't just hide things. It rewrites them. No choirs, just jackals and sand shifting. You'd think burying a god would come with some fanfare. Trumpets, perhaps. Priests in gilded masks, moaning hymns to the rising stars. A sun that stands still in the sky. A chorus of white birds released like prayers with wings. But you'd be wrong, because here in Saqqara, they buried their gods in silence. Not because they didn't care, because they revered, because silence in ancient Egypt was never emptiness. It was presence without interruption. It was the sound you made when you were small enough to kneel beside something eternal. You stand now before one such burial. It isn't impressive at first glance. A modest pit carved into limestone, capped with a layer of crumbling plaster, its surface cracked like old lips refusing to speak. There's no grandeur here, no pillars, no inscriptions, just the ache of something missing. But the priests knew, and the desert knew. They buried Batet here once, or maybe Thoth, or a lesser deity, the kind who doesn't get statues, only whispered promises and bowls of goat's milk. Because in Egypt, the line between mortal and divine was not a wall, it was a thread. And anyone, a cat, a scribe, a star, could become a god, if memory said so. You crouch low. The torch trembles in your hand, casting shadows that slither across the ground like regrets. The air smells warm, earthy, with a trace of rot wrapped in honey. It's the scent of faith preserved in flesh. You run your fingers across the edge of the tomb. Something catches. A groove. A name, maybe, though it's worn beyond translation. Or maybe the impression of a hand, someone else's hand, pressed here 1,000 years ago, hoping the dead might still listen. The Egyptians didn't just worship gods. They hosted them. They fed them, bathed them, put them to bed with prayers and scented oils. They carved homes in the stone and filled them with offerings. Bread, beer, incense, hair, milk, feathers, songs, bones. Sometimes they even buried them, because death was not the end but the next appointment. You stand now, surrounded by silence. But not your silence. The silence of a chamber where a god once slept, wrapped in linen, anointed, dismissed from the world with absolute devotion. You wonder what it looked like. Maybe there were 4 priests. Maybe one wept. Maybe the god's idol was cracked, and no one dared admit it. Or maybe it wasn't a god at all. Maybe it was a child with 2 names, one mortal, one divine. And they buried him in both, unsure which would stick. You look up. The ceiling is low here, closer than before. Not oppressive, just thoughtful. The ancients built tight tombs to keep the dead from drifting. Because memory, like a soul, tends to wander if not held down with architecture. And you feel something now, a tug, not on your clothes, not your arm, but your attention. Something in this chamber is asking to be remembered, not loudly, not greedily, just patiently. You kneel beside the tomb. You press your palm to the stone. It's cool, still, but listening. You don't speak. Words feel too heavy, too modern. Instead, you close your eyes and breathe. And in that breath, the one where incense meets dust, where darkness folds itself around your skin, you feel them. Not ghosts, not spirits, just the gentle, undeniable weight of belief. Because in this place, where gods were laid to rest, not with thunder, but with silence, the divine was not shouted into existence. It was carried in the arms of men, through narrow halls, under heavy sky, and into the ground, not to disappear, but to become the silence itself. They didn't write to entertain. They wrote to save the soul from being eaten. You found a chamber now. Small, square, low-roofed. The walls shimmer faintly in your torchlight. Not gold, no, but ink. Thick, deliberate ink. Blacker than shadow. Laid down like sweat turned to language. You lean closer, and the writing begins to move. Not literally, but something in the curves, the strokes, the impossibly precise loops of the hieroglyphs. They undulate, shift, whisper. These are not poems, not history, not tales of kings or conquests. These are spells. You've stumbled into a sacred text, not on papyrus, but carved into the womb of a tomb. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings ever found. Not written for the living, written to launch the dead. You reach out and gently touch a line of hieroglyphs. A feather, a horn viper, a reed, a symbol that looks like a chair but isn't. It's not a word. It's a formula, a ritual in sentence form, an incantation, like pressing play on a divine escape plan. Because that's what these texts were. Not decoration, not literature. Instructions. Each line is a sentence for the soul, a direction, a protection, a plea. May he ascend to the sky like smoke. May his heart not betray him before the tribunal. May he escape the jaws of Amit, the devourer of the unworthy. You imagine the scribe, kneeling, bent, by torchlight, his fingers numb from chisel work, his lips moving with each line he carved. Because to write a spell was not enough. You had to breathe it, speak it, let it pass through you. That scribe, he didn't write for readers. He wrote for Osiris, for Ra, for eternity. He wrote with urgency, because if he missed a word, just one, the soul entombed here could get lost. And in the Egyptian underworld, getting lost was a death sentence. You weren't judged once. You were judged again and again, through gates and halls and rivers of fire and serpents that ask questions. The dead needed scripts to survive it. They needed the right words to answer, the right names to invoke, the right lies to tell the gods. These walls, they were lifelines. A body could rot, but words could navigate eternity. You continue reading, or trying to, because the more you stare at the symbols, the more your modern mind buckles. This isn't language. It's belief rendered physical. Each glyph is a microcosm. A falcon doesn't just mean Horus. It is Horus. A lotus is not a metaphor. It's a portal. And when the spells say rise, they do not mean hope. They mean lift your spine and fly into the night sky. You literal bandaged corpse. And yet, there's poetry here. A line reads, "He shall cross the lily lake on a bark of light, guided by the breath of the stars." You close your eyes. You see it, a golden boat drifting across a black river. The soul standing aboard, windless, weightless, finally light. Then you open your eyes again and remember, these weren't poems. They were maps. And the soul had to memorize every line. Because if you forgot a spell, if your heart lied on the scale, if you answered the wrong god with the wrong title. You were fed to Amit. Amit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, a creature stitched together from everything you feared. She didn't roar. She didn't hiss. She just opened her mouth, wide enough for your guilt. You stare at the wall, at the spells carved deeper than any wound, and you begin to wonder, what would your spell look like if someone carved your life on a stone? If your soul had to read your story just to survive, would there be enough lines? Would there be enough truth? Because the ancient Egyptians didn't write memoirs. They wrote salvations. They didn't record who they were. They recorded what they needed to become. You step back from the wall. The ink has faded in places. The dust has settled. Time has done what it always does, made gods into ghosts and ghosts into echoes. But the spells are still here, waiting, not for the dead, but for someone to believe them again. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, all bandaged like broken dreams. It happens like this. You turn a corner, careful, respectful, torchlight held low, and stumble into a corridor narrower than the others. The air shifts, not colder, just stranger, still dry, still ancient, but touched by something more intimate. And then you see it, a display of bodies, not royal, not human, but no less sacred. A cat, curled tightly, preserved mid-sleep, or perhaps mid-pounce, wrapped in linen finer than most servants ever wore in life. Its face covered in a painted mask of gold and black, the stylized eyes staring out at you, wide and eternal. To your left, a crocodile, long-sinewed, wrapped head to tail, nearly 3 meters of cloth and scale and solemnity. Its mouth stitched shut with papyrus thread, as if even in death they feared its bite. And beside it, resting in a niche carved lovingly into the wall, an ibis. Its neck elongated like an elegant question mark, its beak gently folded into its own feathers. The linen around it is looser, more casual, like someone ran out of patience or simply assumed birds didn't need precision. You step closer. The scent here is different, less sour, less holy, more nostalgic. There's the faintest trace of oils, pine resin, maybe, and something earthy, musky, like fur that's outlived its warmth. This is not the scent of grandeur. This is the scent of memory. Because Saqqara didn't only preserve kings. It preserved companions, sacrifices, symbols. In ancient Egypt, animals weren't just pets. They were bridges, intermediaries, living prayers. Each species linked to a god, a ritual, a role in the machinery of eternity. Cats, for instance, were manifestations of Batet, the goddess of protection, of music, of motherhood. To own a cat was to invite divine presence into your home. To bury one was to return her to the stars. You kneel beside the feline. The linen is brittle, fragile, but still intact. You wonder about the person who wrapped her. Did they weep? Did they pray? Or was it just another day in the embalming court? Another thread of cotton? Another set of instructions followed by habit? Because some of these animals were beloved, and some were manufactured. You don't want to believe it, but it's true. Saqqara has revealed thousands of animal mummies, but many, too many, are empty, hollow, fake, created for sale, for offerings, for the tourist economy of the afterlife. You run your hand along the stone shelf where a dozen mummified ibises lie side by side like ancient scrolls. Some are real, you hope. Some are just feathers and straw. But they were buried with purpose. Thousands upon thousands of animals, stored in galleries that stretch for miles. Each one a question lobbed into the cosmos. Did I do enough? Will this offering save me? Will this bird, this dog, this cat speak on my behalf when I stand before the gods? Because the ancient Egyptians didn't beg for forgiveness. They traded offerings for mercy, sacrifices for memory, feathers for fate. You imagine walking these halls not as you, but as a young priest, 17, maybe carrying a freshly wrapped falcon down the corridor. Your fingers trembling, not because of what you hold, but because of what you hope it means. You pass niches carved into the walls where hundreds of mummified mice were once stored. Mice, as if the smallest life, when consecrated properly, could tip the balance of the afterlife. And then it hits you. They mummified everything. Everything except what haunted them. Their failures. Their betrayals. The child they abandoned. The lie they told. The night they didn't light the lamp for the dead. Those weren't wrapped. Those weren't entombed. Those were carried. Because linen could preserve bodies. But not regret. Regret isn't a thing you can oil and bind. It clings. It whispers. It outlives even the gods. You look again at the cat. It is beautiful, peaceful, but it does not purr. It never will again. And yet it remains. Because here, in the tombs of Saqqara, even the smallest breath, the lightest paw print, was considered worthy of eternity. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most human thing the Egyptians ever believed. That love, in any form, deserved to be remembered. You try to read them. They read you instead. The chamber yawns before you like a throat carved in stone. No gold, no sarcophagus, just walls, high, smooth, and trembling with script. Every surface is covered in symbols. Not decoration, not poetry, not history. These are incantations, not meant for tourists, not meant for scribes, not even meant for the living. These are the pyramid texts, and they were carved to be read by the soul of a king on the worst night of his life. You raise your torch, and the flicker slides across the wall like breath on skin. It catches on the symbols: a falcon with wings wide, a twisted rope, a feather, a pair of legs walking away. The carvings are shallow but precise. Each glyph is a prayer in disguise. Each line a spell designed not to dazzle, but to save. You approach the wall. Your eyes scan the text, but comprehension never arrives. You are reading the first religious writings of humankind. Words older than scripture, more desperate than philosophy. Words written in a dead language for a dying god-king. And you are a stranger, an interruption. The texts aren't for you. They know. There's something in the way the light shivers against the carvings, as if the wall is watching you back, as if it remembers who stood here last. Not with sneakers and curiosity, but with incense and fear. Because these walls weren't meant to inspire awe. They were meant to help the soul of the dead fight its way out. The afterlife, in Egyptian cosmology, wasn't a peaceful meadow or a harp-filled lounge. It was a labyrinth of dangers, flaming lakes, questioning serpents, doors that asked your name and meant it. The dead had to speak the truth, recite the code, pass the test, and so the priests gave them this: a manual, an operating system for the soul. The pyramid texts read like divine legalese. Say these words to the gods. Say them exactly. Do not forget. Do not hesitate. Do not lie. You can feel the urgency in every line. It's not poetry. It's survival. You lean closer, your breath brushing the wall. One passage catches your eye, or maybe it catches you. The sky weeps for thee. The earth trembles for thee. The gods come forth to meet thee. Rise, O Unas. Rise with thy Ka. Ascend to the sky. Live forever. You whisper it aloud, syllable by syllable. And for a moment, just a breath, the chamber feels less empty. You're not alone. Not haunted. Just witnessed. Like the stones are nodding. Like the texts are checking your pronunciation. And perhaps failing you. Because these spells weren't designed for intruders. They were tailored to a name. To a body. To Unas, the king who lies buried somewhere beneath your feet. wrapped in linen, fed with spells, dreaming in ink and stone. And that's the thing. The pyramid was his machine. These walls were his code. He was meant to read them with his soul. He was meant to become light. You're just a bystander, peeking at someone else's blueprint for eternity. But still it stirs something. Because if Unas needed this much help, if a king needed walls of spells to find his way, what chance do you have? You glance around the chamber. Thousands of lines. Thousands of tiny, precise cuts. And somewhere in them, a path. A map out of death. And none of it is for you. But here's the strange thing. It doesn't feel exclusive. Not quite. It feels like a test you weren't invited to, but you've already started answering. You press your palm to the wall. It's warm. Too warm. And suddenly, every glyph, every falcon, lotus, eye, and outstretched hand feels like it's listening, not judging, just waiting. Because maybe in the end, these texts aren't just for the dead. Maybe they're for anyone who dares to ask, what happens when I stop breathing? And maybe the pyramid texts don't offer answers. Maybe they just offer company. And tonight, in the dark, with the moon above and the dead below, you take comfort in that. You are not alone. Not in this world. Not in the next. Because someone, 4,000 years ago, carved a message into the stone. And you, yes, you, are still listening. You walk, and walk, and walk. The air thickens with history. The corridor greets you like a throat. Long, narrow, pulsing with memory. Not a hallway, exactly, not a tunnel. It's something more ancient, more deliberate, like the ribcage of a creature that swallowed time and never bothered to chew. The torch in your hand casts a small, obedient circle of light, just enough to show the next step. Nothing more. The rest remains cloaked in a velvet black that doesn't feel like absence, but choice. You walk forward. The stone underfoot is smoother here, worn down not by footsteps, but by ritual. Every inch of this place was traversed in ceremony. Not rushed, not casual. Just steady, rehearsed. Like an orchestra of steps following a funeral drum that hasn't been struck in 4,000 years. The silence here is different. It has density. It doesn't just surround you. It presses against your back, into your temples, behind your eyes. It's the kind of silence that makes your own breath feel impolite. And still you walk, because there's something ahead. There always is in places like this. The corridor narrows, slightly. Then again, then more. You duck instinctively, though the ceiling doesn't force you. It's psychological now. The walls feel closer, the air thinner, as if the passage were designed to mimic descent into memory. And that's when you notice the pattern, the carvings on the wall. At first they seem random, abstract lines, winding shapes, tiny grooves like erosion. But then your torch flares slightly, and a shadow reveals the truth. Serpents. So many serpents. Coiled, slithering, watching, each one frozen in limestone, mouths open, tongues extended like questions you don't want to answer. You reach out to touch one. It's small, etched just below chest height. Its eyes, almond-shaped, careful, meet yours with something that might be judgment or warning. The Egyptians saw snakes as more than pests or predators. Snakes were thresholds, symbol of rebirth, of cyclical time, of death wrapped around life like a scarf too tight to remove. They guarded tombs, protected pharaohs, watched the underworld. They were both the path and the obstacle. And this corridor, it isn't just shaped like a serpent. It is one, a symbolic mouth, a stone body, a passage into something deeper. Maybe not hell, but not quite heaven either. You continue. The walls sweat slightly now. The air feels wet, though there's no water. It's just your skin reacting to whatever this place remembers. Your breath shortens. Not from fear. Not quite. It's the atmosphere. Too old. too saturated with prayers and bodies and ink. You're breathing the recycled hopes of thousands. You reach a sharp turn, 90 degrees, sudden and uninviting. The Egyptians loved these. They believed straight lines let evil spirits follow too easily. Corners confuse them. Bent space equals safe space. You step around it, and your torch flickers again. Not out, just startled. And there, at the end of the corridor, stands a door. It's different from the others. No carvings, no names, no false reliefs promising spiritual exits. Just stone, massive, silent, waiting. The floor before it is indented, just slightly, as if many feet have stood there, unsure. You stand there now, and for the first time, you feel the corridor watching you back. You realize something terrible. You're not walking into the tomb. You're being swallowed. The walls, the silence, the serpents, they weren't guiding you. They were digesting you, preparing you. Because to enter deeper into Saqqara isn't to explore. It's to be unwritten, piece by piece, step by step, breath by fading breath. You stare at the door. You could turn back. The sand would forget your footprints in an hour. The stones wouldn't mind. But something in you, stubborn, dreaming, foolish, wants to know, wants to see, wants to descend. So you reach for the door. It is not open. It accepts. And you walk through, into whatever comes next. Of course it wasn't. It never is. The chamber on the other side of the serpent corridor is colder. That's the first thing you feel, not air, but temperature of thought. A psychological chill, a pressure behind the eyes, as if something ancient just inhaled slowly, deeply, and now holds its breath. The light from your torch presses outward, hesitant, unsure. This room is larger than the others, quiet in a way that feels final. In the center sits the sarcophagus, massive, rectangular, uncompromising, made of basalt, black, veined, dense enough to anchor a god or a fear that never left. It doesn't glint. It absorbs the light, the heat, the attention. Even your thoughts seem to grow heavier in its presence. Not louder, just slower. You step closer. The stone is unadorned. No golden inlays. No flattery. Just wait. Stone saying what stone says best. I endure. You rest your hand on the lid. It's cool, smooth in the way of something that's been waiting. And you realize this isn't a box. It's a sentence. And you've reached the punctuation mark. You kneel beside it. There are carvings along the base. Faint, eroded. Hieroglyphs reduced to ghosts of sound. Fragments of a name, a title, a plea. Something about the horizon. Something about forever. But it's the emptiness between the glyphs that speaks louder. You feel the urge to open it. Not out of disrespect, but hunger. Intellectual hunger. Emotional hunger. The desperate human itch to see what death looks like when it's prepared with linen and oil and belief. But of course, it's already open. The lid sits askew, shifted slightly to the side. You hadn't noticed it at first. The dark plays tricks. But now that you see it, you feel in your stomach. The silence here is not passive. It's coiled. You peer over the edge, and the first thing you notice is not the body. It's the absence of air. Inside the sarcophagus, the atmosphere is thicker, as if the soul never left, just settled. The second thing you notice is the linen. Still there, still wrapped, still bandaged, though aged and yellowed, and stiffened into folds that no longer move. It clings to the form beneath it, a body long surrendered to time, yet still arranged like it meant something. You expect hollowness. You find intention. The arms are crossed, faint outlines beneath the layers. The feet bound together. The face obscured by layers of resin-soaked cloth, tilted slightly upward, as if even in death, it was listening for a voice that never came. You don't know their name. No plaque remains. But names are just doors, anyway. What matters now is presence. And this tomb is not empty. Because a body is never just a body. It is a memory in muscle, a prayer in flesh, a question carved into bone. And here, wrapped in ritual, buried in stone, lies someone who was once expected to become eternal. A priest, maybe, or a scribe, or someone less important, but more beloved. Someone who paid dearly to be remembered. You imagine their death, not the moment of dying. That's always mundane. But the after, the preparation, the washing, the draining of blood, the extraction of organs, the careful coiling of limbs, the incense, the oils, the chanting, the belief that this mummified form would be the vessel for the journey. They believed this person would rise again, not metaphorically, literally. The sarcophagus wasn't meant to imprison the dead. It was a launch pad, a cocoon, a second womb, a place to wait until the stars remembered your name and came back to collect you. But they never came. Or maybe they did, and you were too late. Either way, this person lies here unclaimed, not by gods, but by attention. And that's where you come in. Because now someone knows. Now someone has seen. Now someone has whispered into the chamber, even if only with breath. And the dead, they are patient. They don't need applause, just witness. You place your hand over your heart. It beats, hard, fast. The linen rustles, not in movement, but in memory, as if it once stirred, and the sarcophagus has never forgotten it. You take one last look. You do not touch. You do not pray. You remember. And that, in Saqqara, is the highest offering of all. Not blood, but close enough. It begins subtly. You've already grown accustomed to the scent of ancient linen and dried resin, the sharp edge of myrrh lingering in corners, the slow perfume of time exhaled through cracks in stone. But now there's something else. Metallic, dry, sharp. You pause mid-step. It hits the back of your throat first, like a coin pressed to your tongue. Your stomach tightens, not from nausea, but recognition. You know this smell. It's copper, or rather, the ghost of it. What iron remembers when it dreams of blood. You move slowly down the passage, torch held steady. The shadows stretch long and fragile, like limbs that don't remember how to move. The walls sweat a little more here. The air feels warm against your neck, like breath you didn't ask for. And then you see it. Not another chamber. A room. Square. Shallow. Functional. And brutal. This isn't a burial space. It's a workshop. A lab. A slaughterhouse for the divine. The embalming room, where gods are manufactured from flesh. You step over the threshold, and the scent thickens immediately. The smell of age and antiseptic sanctity, of oil and iron, of holy violation. There's a stone table in the center, flat, sloped slightly toward a groove cut along the edge. A channel, for runoff, not symbolic, practical. This was where the body came to begin again, not to rest, not to be wept over, to be opened. You circle the table, cautious, reverent. There are no tools here now, at least not many, but you can imagine them clearly. A bronze scalpel, curved delicately like a question mark. A reed to break the nose. Long hooks to pull the brain, strand by strand, from the skull. Bowls to catch. Cloths to wrap. Jars to carry what once made a human human. And the embalmers. Men in leopard skin sashes, their heads shaved, their hands trained in the quiet violence of care. You wonder how they spoke. If they whispered. If they sang. If they named the parts as they removed them. Here's the liver, sacred. Here's the stomach, suspicious. Here's the heart, the center of morality. The heart was left in, usually, unless, of course, the deceased was a liar. It might disappear, removed quietly, forgotten quietly. sent into jars that never made it into the tomb. Imagine that. An eternity without your own conscience. You look down at the table again. It's stained. Not visibly, not obviously, but your body knows. It smells the years. The thousands of moments where skin was peeled back to make room for something better. Where the soul was coaxed into readiness, gently and with force. You run your fingers along the groove in the table. It's smooth, worn by use, not broken, just tired. And then you notice them along the back wall. Low shelves, stone cubbies. Inside, remnants, shards of alabaster, fragments of linen. A single, intact jar, sealed with black resin. Its lid shaped like a falcon's head. Cabocinoph, guardian of the intestines. You don't touch it, but it looks back. These jars weren't ornamental. They weren't quaint museum pieces. They were vessels of faith. The belief that even your organs had destinies. That your lungs needed guardians. That your intestines needed prayers. You glance around. This room has no carvings. No decorations. Just purpose. Because ritual wasn't always beautiful. Sometimes it was precision soaked in blood. And maybe that's what you're smelling. Not blood, not copper, not resin, but intention. The metallic sin of men trying to cheat death with sharp instruments and hope. You take one more look around. The stone, the groove, the jar, and something in you whispers. This is the part no one wanted to remember. Not the prayers, not the resurrection, not the pyramid above. This room, this smell, is the price of eternity. You step backward, and for a moment, you think the table exhales, not with breath, with memory. This tomb? Overcompensation in limestone. You feel it before you see it. A strange tension in the stone. The architecture changes. The angles sharpen. The corridor widens just slightly, and the air grows more arrogant. Yes, arrogant. The silence here isn't passive like any other chambers. It's expectant, performative, as if something or someone wants to be noticed. And then you see it. A tomb, grand, broad-shouldered, symmetrical in that overconfident way only men with something to prove ever achieve. The walls are smoother, polished in places. The lintel is intact. There's even an attempt at columns, though they're stubby and awkward, like they're flexing but haven't earned it. And at the center of it all, like a thesis carved in stone, sits the sarcophagus. Too large, too ornate, too proud. He wasn't a pharaoh, but he wanted to be. You approach, and already you can tell this is different. This tomb doesn't hum with reverence or tremble with ancient breath. It poses, like a man in borrowed robes, trying to smile like he belongs in a portrait of gods. You don't know his name? Most of them have been chiseled off. By time, by jealous successors, by the realization that history doesn't tolerate wannabes. But traces remain. You see the residue of what once was ambition. Faint lines of gold leaf in the carvings, still clinging like the last crumbs of a feast that was never quite real. The hieroglyphs here are messier, copied perhaps, not composed. Formulaic, hollow. You read one aloud, softly. He shall rise like R.A. in the morning sky. A common phrase. Too common. You've seen it scratched into tombs of fishmongers and grain accountants. A pharaoh's metaphor applied like perfume to the unroyal. And still, you don't laugh. Because there's something tragic here. A man with just enough wealth to build a tomb, but not enough legacy to fill it. He likely bought his way into this chamber, bribed a few priests, paid a scribe to mimic the language of kings. He hired masons. He ordered fine linens. He chose a name for his ka that sounded expensive. He told himself, I will not be forgotten. You kneel beside the sarcophagus. The lid is sealed. The surface carved with rows of gods, their forms rendered stiff and awkward. as if they too feel embarrassed to be here. But there's no disdain in the air, only sadness, because in Egypt, eternity was a currency, and some people maxed out their faith just to afford a sliver of it. You place your hand on the stone. It's warm, dry, heavy. The man beneath this lid may not have ruled armies, but he ruled his fears. He feared being average. He feared being unremembered. And so he built, not for the gods, but for his version of himself. And isn't that the most human thing of all? To polish our names, to inflate our tombs, to dress our memory in clothes that never quite fit. You rise, look around. This isn't a pharaoh's resting place, but it is a mirror, because you've seen this tomb before, not here, but in resumes, in mausoleums, and social media feeds. The architecture of overcompensation never really changes. You give him one last nod. He tried, and in this land of the divine and the eternal, that might be the most sacred act of all. There was an eclipse once. They called it the swallowing. You've been walking for what feels like days. The torch in your hand is now shorter, burning with a quieter confidence, less like a guide, more like a companion resigned to the journey. The darkness around you breathes slowly. You breathe with it, and then it changes. Not the air, not the space, the light. The corridor ends at a chamber open to the sky. You step out, eyes lifting instinctively, and there it is. The moon, but not as it was before. You freeze. You are not prepared. The moon is not whole. It is vanishing, the top edge already carved into by darkness. A shadow creeping over it like a mouth, closing slowly over a pearl. An eclipse, ancient, absolute, silent. You stand in the center of the chamber, back straight, as if summoned by this moment. The walls around you are low, barely chest height. They weren't meant to contain anything. They were built for observation. An open courtyard exposed to the cosmos, lined with benches of stone where priests once knelt, their eyes skyward, their hands shaking. Because in ancient Egypt, an eclipse wasn't astronomy. It was apocalypse rehearsed. They called it the swallowing. The sun or moon consumed by a divine serpent, or by Ra's enemies, or by chaos itself. Not metaphorically, literally. You tilt your head back. The moon now is a half coin, dulling with each second. You try to be rational, to remember what you've been taught. The moon passes into Earth's shadow. The angle of light bends. It will return soon. But here, under Saqqara's sky, those thoughts don't hold. Because when you're standing in a necropolis built on eternity, reason tastes like denial. You understand, suddenly, how they must have felt. The priests, the mourners, the children who had never seen darkness take shape. A celestial body they trusted to watch over them, suddenly dimming, dying without warning or mercy. You can almost hear it, the prayers rising, desperate and imperfect, spiraling into the sky like smoke. Protect the eye of Horus. Bring back the moon. Spare us the swallowing. This was more than fear. This was cosmic betrayal. Because if the heavens could vanish, then so could you. You sink to your knees. Not out of faith, not out of fatigue, but reverence. The eclipse deepens. Now only a silver ring remains. The rest is eaten by night. And in that moment, something in you fractures slightly. Because you feel it deep in your chest, beneath your ribs, behind the part of you that speaks language. This terrible, beautiful truth. You're not permanent. None of us are. Not the kings. Not the gods. Not even the moon. And yet, they built anyway. Tombs. Spells. Stones stacked like stairs to nowhere. They knew the sky would forget them. And still, they whispered their names into it. You close your eyes. The darkness is total now. Not inside you, around you. A velvet black, heavier than blindness. No wind. No sound, just you, and the ancient silence of a world that remembers how to end. And in that silence, you realize this eclipse, this moment, was once the reason they embalmed, why they mummified, why they wrote spells into stone. Because death wasn't the terror, being forgotten was. And so they wrapped their dead. They built tombs with doors that wouldn't open. They painted ceilings with stars, in case the real ones ever stopped looking. You open your eyes. The light returns slowly. A crescent, then a half, then more. The moon survives the swallowing, as it always does. As you hope you will. You rise, dusted, changed, small. And as you leave the chamber, you do not speak. You leave that to the dead. They've been doing it longer than you. Or maybe archaeologists are just late robbers. Let's not be naive. Saqqara was never a secret. It may look like a city of the dead now. Quiet, sacred, robed in dust and holy rot. But beneath its silence lies a history of fingers, knives, and greed. This place has been opened, closed, and opened again. Not once, not twice, but always. You crouch beside a shattered doorway. The stone has been smashed inward, not broken by time, but by intention. You see the evidence in the way the blocks splinter, not softened by erosion, but stabbed. A crowbar did this, or something older, something blunter. You step through it. Another tomb, smaller, more intimate, and empty. Well, not quite. It's full of absence. Where a sarcophagus should be, there's only a stone depression in the floor, filled with dust and disappointment. A faint indentation in the shape of someone who once deserved more. You run your hand along the edge of the hollow. It's chipped, scarred. You don't need to imagine the scene. It's happened thousands of times. Night, torches, men with dry mouths and shaking hands. Not priests, not mourners, robbers, criminals with no interest in eternity, only in what eternity left behind. They dug, they broke, they ripped gold from the mouths of the dead, scraped amulets from between ribs, flung mummified pets into corners like trash. The Book of the Dead, burned for warmth. The linen wrappings, stripped and sold. The body itself, often disassembled. A leg here, a skull there, discarded like clutter. And still, can you blame them? The pharaohs had buried entire kingdoms beneath their feet. Gold, ivory, scarabs, garnets, maps to the stars written in lapis lazuli. While above ground, the living were starving. Robbery wasn't desecration. It was redistribution. You stand in the broken tomb, trying to decide what you feel. Anger? Pity? And then it occurs to you. The line between robber and archaeologist is thinner than we'd like to admit. The grave robbers came at night with torches. The archaeologists came centuries later with cameras and notebooks. But both opened tombs. Both disturbed the dead. Both took things out and called it knowledge. You glance down at the floor. Someone once lay here for over 1,000 years, undisturbed. And then, one day not. Because humans cannot leave mystery alone. We carve, we record, and then, eventually we open. You walk to the far end of the chamber where the walls still hold fragments of color. Red, blue, a smear of green. A mural once covered this wall. A feast, a journey, a hymn in image form. Now it's mostly gone, either flaked away naturally or scraped off by someone who thought their wall back home would look better with a little Egypt on it. And yet, something remains. A face, faint, faded, but still there. It watches you, not with sadness, with understanding. Because the ancient Egyptians knew this would happen. They planned for it. They built false chambers. They had treasures beneath decoys. They designed curses not to kill, but to warn. Whosoever disturbs this tomb will be devoured by crocodiles in the afterlife. Or May your name be forgotten for eternity. Not a threat, a wish. Because in Egypt, the worst fate wasn't death. It was being unremembered. And grave robbers? They weren't just stealing gold. They were erasing names. You run your hand along the chipped wall once more. Dust rises. You smell it. Old linen, old lies, old longing. You step back into the corridor, and in the silence that follows, you wonder. When we dig, when we study, when we unearth, are we learning? Or just dressing our curiosity in gloves and calling it science? Because the tomb is still empty. The body is still gone. And all you're left with is a name you'll never know. You weren't ready for that. There's a room they don't always show on the maps. No labels, no grand architecture, no golden ceilings or chanting gods painted across the walls. It's small, plain, like a breath held too long. You walk into it without meaning to, as if the corridor decided for you. The light is softer here, not because the torch is dimmer. It isn't. But because the room itself has chosen a gentler silence. And in the center, on a low platform of stone barely the height of your knee, lies something wrapped in linen. Small, fragile, impossible. You already know what it is, even before the air changes, before the smell becomes tender and bitter at once, before your hands start trembling without reason. This isn't a king, not a scribe, not a high priest. This was a child. You step closer, slowly, as if you might wake them. The linen is still intact, though yellowed by centuries. It clings to the small shape beneath, not tight but lovingly. A wrapping done not for grandeur, but with hands that hesitated. Maybe even hands that shook. Because how do you wrap a child for eternity? There's no manual for that. No spell strong enough to explain it. You kneel beside the stone. Your knees echo against the floor. It feels wrong. Your body too large, your breath too loud, your life too loud. The linen has curled back slightly around the face. Not much, just enough to see the edge of jaw. A cheekbone too soft to forget. And then you see it, a tiny, pearled tooth, peeking through the wrappings like a ghost of laughter. A baby tooth. You weren't ready for that. Not after the pyramids. Not after the serpent corridors and the gods with animal heads. Not after spells etched into stone and men who tried to buy their way into heaven. This is different. This isn't power. This isn't belief. This isn't some pharaoh's vanity project. This is grief frozen in cloth. You close your eyes and try to imagine who this child was. A boy, a girl, a name spoken softly once, and then no more. Did they die of fever? A bite? A fall? Did someone sing to them as their breath slowed? Did they understand what was happening? You picture the funeral, not the kind with priests and processions and golden boats etched into the wall, but the other kind, the smaller one. Maybe just a mother and a father. Maybe a sibling watching from the doorway. Maybe a grandmother refusing to speak. You picture the moment the linen touched the skin. The way someone might have tucked it beneath the chin. A final unconscious act of comfort. And then silence. You reach forward, not to touch, but to offer something quieter. Your breath. Your stillness. Your witnessing. Because this child didn't ask to be remembered. They didn't build a tomb. They didn't buy a sarcophagus or commission a prayer. They were just loved. And that love, whatever shape it took, is what brought them here. Wrapped, buried, preserved not by resin or salt, but by intention. The Egyptians believed children were sacred, not unfinished humans, but closer to the divine, small enough to slip between worlds, still glowing from the last place they came from. And when they died, they weren't just mourned. They were protected, their bodies entombed in soft prayers, their names whispered through hallways of stone, hoping the gods would take them gently. You rise slowly, knees aching. You leave the chamber without looking back. not out of fear, but respect. Because some things are not meant to be studied, only felt. And somewhere, deep beneath the stone and spell and silence of Saqqara, a child still sleeps, still dreaming, still wrapped in the last thing we can give the dead, a memory too small to let go. Thoth, god of wisdom, but also the one who records your sins. There's a statue in the next room, small, squat, carved from a bluish stone flecked with something pale, perhaps calcite, perhaps stars. It sits at an odd angle, perched on a plinth just slightly too high for comfort, as if it were never meant to look you in the eye. But it does. Its body is human, hunched with the fatigue of eternity. Its face is not. Its face is a baboon, not smiling, not angry, just observing. And suddenly, you're aware of everything you've done that might not be worth remembering. Because this is Thoth, scribe of the gods, master of wisdom, inventor of writing, and yes, judge of the dead. Forget the ibis for now. That delicate-beaked scholar version. That's Thoth on his quiet days. But here, in Saqqara, he wears a baboon's face. Primitive, watchful, a mouth not built for speech, but for biting. And it's unsettling, because you were raised on the idea that wisdom was gentle, polite, academic, clean desks and tidy notes and glasses balanced on dignified noses. But this version of wisdom, this one looks like it remembers your ancestors' ancestors. This one has seen every mistake repeated across dynasties. This one has teeth. You circle the statue slowly. It's worn, the ears chipped, one eye weathered smooth. But the mouth remains, wide, slightly open, waiting to speak or devour, or both. In Egyptian mythology, Thoth was not just a god of intellect. He was the divine accountant. He recorded everything, every offering, every prayer, every lie told at the foot of a god statue, every extra coin slipped into the temple donation box by a man hoping to buy forgiveness. And most importantly, he recorded your final judgment. You remember the weighing of the heart. A soul is placed on one side of the scale. A feather, Ma'at's feather, symbol of truth, on the other. If your heart is heavier than the feather, your soul is fed to Amit, the devourer. But before that, someone has to take notes. Enter Thoth. He doesn't intervene. He doesn't argue. He just writes, with a calm detachment that makes your skin itch, with ink made from starlight and consequences. And now you're standing in front of him, and he's looking at you, not with warmth, not with cruelty, just with the quiet horror of a being who remembers everything. You think about the lies you've told, the names you've forgotten, the time you promised you'd return someone's call and didn't. Small things, until they aren't. Because in Thoth's book, nothing is small. Everything accumulates. Every omission, every whisper, every selfish moment balanced against a feather in a place beyond time. You reach out almost instinctively and touch the plinth. It's cool, smooth, and somehow you feel the pages turning. Not literal pages, not parchment, but the echo of writing. Scratched into stone, pressed into spirit. And it occurs to you, he's still doing it. Even now, even here, even in this tomb long emptied, long sealed, long cataloged by scholars and grave robbers alike. Thoth is still recording. Not because he must, because that's what wisdom does. It remembers, not out of sentiment, out of necessity, because someone has to hold the truth when everything else gets buried. You step back. The statue doesn't move, doesn't breathe, but something behind its gaze has acknowledged you. You feel it settle, the weight of your own record. Not damning, just complete. You whisper a thank you, not because you're thankful, but because it feels like the only safe thing to say. And then you leave, quietly, carefully, like someone who knows their name has just been written in a book they'll never read. You weren't the first to listen, but you might be the last. There's a corner of Saqqara where the walls are lower, the sand deeper, and the silence heavier. Not solemn, not reverent. Heavy, the kind of silence that feels like it was made deliberately, built brick by brick out of things no one wanted to say. You find it by accident. You turn the wrong way, or maybe the right one. The passage narrows, the light fades, and suddenly, the ground crunches differently under your feet. You stop. You lower the torch. And there they are. Bones. Scattered. Unglorified. Unwrapped. No sarcophagus. No gilded mask. No funeral texts written in lapis or onyx. Just remains. Human. Unmistakably. And bare. You crouch, slowly, and brush the sand away for what appears to be a shoulder. Dislocated from the rest of its body by time, or violence, or both. The bone is pale, but not white. A beige that speaks of long sleep and longer abandonment. You stare at it, and something stares back. Not a face, not a spirit, but the echo of a story that was once told, maybe out loud, maybe only whispered. A life that happened, laughed, wept, ended, and was never properly closed. You reach for another piece, a femur, snapped mid-length. It doesn't belong here. None of them do, because this wasn't a tomb. This was a pit, a refusal. The Egyptians revered death, structured it, dressed it in stars and spells and architecture. They gave it names and addresses and passwords for the afterlife. But these bones, they didn't get that. They weren't invited to eternity. They were dumped, covered, forgotten. And yet, they speak. Not with language, with position, with breakage, with silence that resists silence. You remember what the old archaeologist once said. Even bones lie, but not well. You gather from the arrangement that there was no ritual here. No pose, no care. Just a rush. A shoving of limbs into earth. A quick goodbye made of fear or shame. Maybe these were workers who built the tombs and collapsed in exhaustion. Maybe they were rebels. Maybe they were plague victims. Maybe they weren't supposed to die yet, and the priests didn't know what to do with them. Or maybe someone didn't believe they deserved the afterlife. That's the most brutal part. Not that they were forgotten, but that they were excluded. You lean back, the torchlight flickering wildly against the cave-like walls. And you listen. For what? You're not sure. A sound, a breath, a name. But the bones are quiet now. Not because they have nothing left to say, but because they've said it too many times already, and no one listened. Still, you stay, because someone should. You sit cross-legged beside them, like an uninvited mourner at a funeral that's thousands of years late. You offer no prayers, just presence, and it feels like enough, because even without voice, the bones have told you something essential. That not all death is equal. That even in the land of gods and geometry, some lives ended with no story left behind. No papyrus, no magic spell, just a humorous fracture by panic and time. You rise slowly. The air seems to press harder against your skin as you leave, as if reluctant to let you go. As if the bones had begun to trust you. You glance back one more time. They do not glow. They do not whisper. They just lie there, as they have, as they will. But now at least someone knows. You read them anyway. That was your first mistake. At first, you think it's just another corridor. Stone walls, narrow enough to brush your shoulders. Dust in the corners, the scent of dried salt and old ink. Everything whispers the usual. You're trespassing softly. But then you see them. The texts. Not painted, not engraved on tablets. Carved directly into the walls. From floor to ceiling. Every stone surface here has been etched with symbols. Hieroglyphs stacked in rigid columns like scaffolding for the soul. Words cut into stone with a precision that defies exhaustion. You stop walking. Not from awe, from instinct. Because the air here feels literate. Not in a dusty library way, but in the way a mouth feels before it speaks something dangerous. These are the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious scriptures on earth. Born right here in Saqqara, before the Torah, before the Gospels, before any whispered Sanskrit in the dark. And they were never written for you, not for the living, not for wanderers with torches and curiosity and good intentions. They were spells, codes, rituals, crafted to guide the dead king, and only the dead king, through the perils of the afterlife. You tilt the torch upward. The flames flicker across the walls, making the gods dance in the shadows. You see familiar shapes, eyes, crocodiles, ankhs, boats sailing backward through stars, men walking upside down, birds with human arms and knives in their wings. The language of otherness. You can't read most of it, not truly. No one can, not with certainty. But a phrase repeats itself, over and over. May he ascend. May he not fall back to earth. You trace the carving with your fingertips. The grooves are shallow now. Time eats language too, and yet, some part of it still bites. Because these were not poetic musings or metaphorical flourishes. They were instructions. Do this. Say this. Burn this. Avoid the snake in the 9th hour. Speak the name of the gatekeeper at the 12th. Do not die twice. You wonder what it was like for the priests, standing here, reciting these words aloud in voices trained to never stutter. Did they believe? Or did they fear what would happen if they didn't? You imagine a funeral, a dead king, a corridor just like this, a priest with cracked lips and a voice hoarse from too many resurrections. He chants each spell, each god's name, each doorway's password. The tomb is sealed. The spirit departs. And now, for 1,000 years later, you read the words again. What does that make you? An intruder? A witness? Or something worse? Because the pyramid texts were never abandoned. They were buried. And there's a difference. Abandonment is passive. Burial is intentional. You begin to feel it in your chest. A slow, cold crawling. Not fear. Something older. As if something behind the stone is listening. Not hostile. Just confused. Why are you here? Why are you reading this? Why do you think these words belong to you? Because that's the truth, isn't it? We came here to learn, but we ended up eavesdropping on the dead. And the worst part? We translated them. We put their afterlife into textbooks. We uploaded their soul maps into PDFs. We took their sacred and made it academic. And now the spells no longer work, because they were meant to be spoken in dark rooms with holy air and terrified hands. Not read by flashlight, not Googled. You lower the torch. The walls still glimmer with old power, or maybe just old warnings. You leave the corridor, slowly. And behind you, the pyramid texts fall silent again. Not erased, just waiting for someone who needs them, for someone who still believes they mean something more than metaphor. Some say the man died. Others say the gods changed their mind. You find it at the edge of the necropolis, a slope of crumbling stone half swallowed by sand, half by time. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rise like the pyramids or stare like a sphinx. It simply waits, modest, incomplete, almost embarrassed. You hesitate. The entrance isn't blocked. It's just ashamed of itself. This is the tomb they never finished. You duck beneath a low arch, careful not to scrape your head. Inside, there's no gold leaf, no columns carved with prayers, no perfumed air pretending not to reek of death. Just bare stone, not polished, not painted, interrupted. The hallway ends before it should. A few meters in, the walls stop. Literally, as if the chisel just gave up. You run your hand along the groove where a column should have been. There's a faint sketch carved in red ochre. A grid, a god, a row of lotus flowers. but it fades halfway through like the artist was called away and never returned. You try to imagine him, sweat dripping, fingers cramped, lips mouthing each hieroglyph as he draws. Maybe he coughed. Maybe he died. Maybe he simply quit, and no one replaced him, because the tomb's owner, whoever he was, stopped being important. His name? Gone. No inscription. No cartouche. No curse to ward off grave robbers. No plea for remembrance. Just absence. The kind that hums quietly beneath your ribs. You sit down on the cold floor. It's uneven, half-carved, still echoing with decisions never made. What happened here? Did the man run out of money? Was he overthrown? Was he exiled? Did the Nile flood too early? Or worse, was he forgotten before he died? That's the real fear, isn't it? Not death, but the pause that comes before it. When the world begins to forget your name while your heart is still beating. You stare at the walls, trying to imagine what they might have held. Scenes of the afterlife, cattle herders under a blue ceiling, a sacred boat sailing across stars. Instead, there is nothing, and the nothingness is loud, because Egyptians believed that your tomb was your forever house, your last resume, your biography in stone. And this man's house never had a roof, never had guests, never had a door. You feel it in your chest, the ache of an unfinished life memorialized by an unfinished death. And it's not tragic. It's too common for that. Maybe he was just another bureaucrat who missed his promotion. Maybe he fell out of favor. Maybe his son didn't love him enough to pay the workers. You look around at the raw stone. You can still see the chisel marks, deep, hesitant, human. A hand tried to make something eternal and then didn't. There's something oddly comforting about that, because most of us will leave things unfinished. Letters unsent, books unread, stories half told. We're all, in some way, just half a tomb waiting for someone to care. You rise slowly, brush dust from your hands, and as you leave the chamber, you turn back one last time. Not out of pity, out of respect, because this man, whoever he was, may not have finished his tomb, but at least he started it, and that, in the land of gods and ghosts, counts for something. Because when you know how eternity is built, you try to build one that doesn't collapse. You don't find his tomb by accident. It's not one of the flashy ones. No towering obelisk. No bragging sphinxes out front. Just a modest facade, worn by wind, softened by time. Like an old man who no longer needs to prove anything. The name? Cainwezet, but you won't find it on postcards. His title was long, ceremonial, heavy with syllables and reverence. High Priest of Ptah, Prince of the Blood, Restorer of the Monuments, Master of Secrets. But most people just called him something simpler. The first Egyptologist. Because long before Napoleon scholars arrived, long before Victorian gentlemen mispronounced hieroglyphs in candlelight, Cainwezet was already wandering the necropolis. Not to build, but to remember. He was the fourth son of Ramses II. Yes, that Ramses, the Sun King, the conqueror, the god in a kilt. But unlike his war-hungry siblings, Cainwezet didn't crave battles or monuments made in haste. He loved ruins, old ones. He walked Saqqara not as a prince, but as a pilgrim, touching stones already ancient in his time, brushing sand off names already slipping into myth. Where others saw crumbling structures, he saw stories mid-sentence. Where others built to be remembered, he remembered so they wouldn't be lost. He restored pyramids that had collapsed, recarved names that had faded, cleaned tombs that hadn't seen visitors in centuries. He was a man obsessed with legacy. Not his own, but everyone else's. And yet, he eventually built his own tomb here. Quiet, tucked into the folds of Saqqara like a final footnote he hoped no one would skip. You step inside. It's nothing like the king's. There's no gold leaf, No room for attendance. Just careful lines. Thoughtful geometry. Walls that breathe calm. Here's a scene of him offering incense. Their depiction of him seated with his father. Not above, not below, but beside. And in the center, a simple inscription. He who honored the forgotten. You walk deeper, past the final chamber. And it feels intimate. Not like a tomb, like a study. You can almost hear the scratch of a reed brush against papyrus, the quiet inhalation before a chant, the whisper of feet tracing the same path, again and again, not for power, but for meaning. Because Kamwezit wasn't designing a monument. He was designing an argument. That memory is sacred. That time doesn't erase what love insists on keeping. That you can build a life not to be seen, but to see others more clearly. He knew the tombs would crumble. He knew future dynasties would forget his name. But maybe, just maybe, one wanderer some night, torch in hand and silence in their throat, would step into this space and understand that eternity isn't made of stone. It's made of intention. And here you are, touching the same walls he touched, reading the names he once saved. And in that moment, you realize he built his afterlife, not in the stars, but in you. Not every entrance is meant to open, but you still try. It happened just past dusk, that hour when the desert exhales and the wind turns cold without apology. The torch flickers, the sand crunches beneath your boots like broken teeth, and your mind starts to drift until your foot hits something not sand. A dull thud. Hollow. Wooden. You kneel. Brush it away. At first, it looks like nothing. A slab half swallowed by centuries. But the more you uncover, the more the shape reveals itself. A rectangle. Smooth. Framed in stone. Etched faintly with symbols long eroded by time and denial. You freeze. Because this isn't a wall. This is a door. But there's no hinge, no crack, no visible seam, no handle, just flatness, like a thought someone carved and then immediately regretted. And yet, you feel it, that subtle tug behind your ribs, the whisper that isn't sound, the sense that something or someone is waiting. You press your hand to the surface. It's cold, too cold. The stone shouldn't feel like this, not in the open air. It feels like touching the back of a coin in a grave, or a mirror that's forgotten what it reflects. You look closer. Tiny markings barely there. A line of hieroglyphs etched so faintly you'd miss them, unless you were already suspicious. You squint. Translate slowly. Not perfectly. This door is not for you. Classic. It doesn't say do not enter, or beware, or curse upon the desecrator of the dead. It says something worse. It says you were never supposed to notice it at all. And yet you do. You stare at the door until your eyes ache. And still, it doesn't yield. You try knocking. Once. Twice. The sound doesn't echo. It just vanishes, as if the space behind it eats sound. You begin to imagine what's on the other side. Another tomb? A vault of forgotten gods? A prison? A cradle? The Egyptians were obsessed with liminality, the thresholds between life and death, sleep and waking, flesh and soul. They didn't just build tombs. They built portals. And some doors were meant to stay closed. But others were made to open for only one person, at only one moment, under only one moon. You step back, unsure if you're afraid or thrilled or both. Because this is what makes Saqqara different from other ruins. It doesn't just preserve the past. It hides it, keeps secrets for the dead, not the living. Secrets that were never meant to be spoken aloud, only understood in that flickering space between waking and dreaming. You sit in front of the door, and you wait, not for it to open, but for something else, some feeling to pass, some presence to shift, some weight to lift. You close your eyes, and for a moment, just one, you hear it. Not a sound, a breath, as if the door had lungs, as if something behind its sighed. Not in warning, in memory. And then it's gone. You open your eyes. The door remains sealed, mute, pale, waiting. And you get up. Because sometimes not opening the door is the most powerful act of all. You walk away slowly, with sand in your shoes and a question in your chest you'll never quite name. Behind you, the door remains what it was. A boundary, not between places, but between who you were and who you might have become. Had it opened. Up above, they move, but here below, they were captured, sealed, and made to stand still forever. You don't notice it at first. The chamber is like the others, stone-cut, rectangular, cooler than the sun-bleached corridor behind you. The air smells of limestone and dust, dry, dense, unmoved for centuries. But then you look up, and the sky is still there. No, not the real sky. A painted one, or so it appears, until you realize something else. The stars are glowing, not with torchlight, not with reflection, but with the faintest self-possession, as though someone trapped light inside pigment. The ceiling of the tomb is covered in night. A deep, mineral blue, not the blue of dreams, but of knowing. A blue that feels heavier than black, like ink that carries the weight of every name ever whispered beneath it. And the stars? Not scattered randomly. They're placed with purpose. Each one a glyph, a symbol, a memory. They trace constellations that aren't familiar to you. Not quite Orion, not quite the Big Dipper, but something older, something remembered by the dead and forgotten by the living. You lie down on the stone slab in the center of the room. It's not a tomb. It's a planetarium for souls. Because this was no ordinary burial site. This was where someone, perhaps a priest, perhaps a queen, perhaps no one you'd recognize, was laid to rest beneath a sky that would never change. Not because time stopped, but because time here was tamed. The ancient Egyptians called it the imperishable stars. They didn't rise. They didn't set. They rotated around the pole, night after night, season after season, always visible, always present. They were the stars of the gods, the ones who never died. And for the highest of the high, pharaohs, sages, architects of divine order, death wasn't about descent. It was about ascent. You didn't go under. You rose into the night sky, into the field of stars that could never vanish. You became one of them, seen forever, moving endlessly, yet never falling. You stare upward. The ceiling seems to stretch farther than it should. You feel like you're sinking into the cosmos while lying still. Your breath slows. Your thoughts begin to lose their shape. And for one fleeting moment, you're not a visitor. You're the buried, the dreamer, the soul mid-journey. You feel the cold edge of stone against your spine, the weight of thousands of years humming beneath your body. And above you, the undying stars, watching, still there, still shining, still holding vigil. You think of your own sky, one polluted by neon and memory loss and digital noise. You think of how long it's been since you truly looked up without a screen between you and wonder. But here in this tomb, someone said, "Let the heavens come with me," not as metaphor, not as decoration, but as destination. You sit up slowly, not wanting to break the illusion, but the stars remain. They do not blink. They do not mock. They just exist in stubborn defiance of decay. And that's the real miracle, isn't it? That someone painted stars, not for beauty, not for science, but for hope. Because if they could keep shining, maybe we could too. Because hunger doesn't end with death. It just becomes symbolic. You're not prepared for how human it feels. Not sacred, not divine, just oddly domestic. You step into a chamber small enough to be mistaken for a storage room. Low ceiling and all. At first glance, that's exactly what it looks like. Clay vessels line the walls. Stone basins carved into the ground. slabs the shape of tables, old tools rusted into disuse. But this is no kitchen. It's an offering chapel, or more precisely, a place where the dead were fed, not metaphorically, literally. The ancient Egyptians didn't see death as the end of appetite. They believed the spirit, the Ka, retained all earthly needs: water, bread, meat, beer, and something even more vital, attention. So every morning, sometimes for years, sometimes for centuries, someone came here, lit the incense, poured the wine, set the table, and fed the dead. You kneel by one of the offering tables. It's carved from a single piece of limestone, smooth but worn in the center, eroded not by weather, but by repetition. Thousands of hands, placing thousands of meals, in silence. Your fingers trace the outline of carved loaves, ducks, onions, lotus flowers, all symbols of sustenance. The dead didn't eat the food. They consumed its essence, its soul. It was the gesture that mattered. You close your eyes and imagine it. A priest, half asleep, stumbling in at dawn. His voice hoarse from morning air and nightly chants. He pours the wine slowly, deliberately. He recites the words. Come, O you who are in your tomb. Take your bread. Take your beer. Nourish your Ka. Rise up in joy. No audience. No applause. Just the rhythm of devotion. And for the Egyptians, that rhythm held the world together. You walk to the back wall, where a carved niche opens like a window between the living and the dead. It's a false door, one of the oldest religious inventions on earth. A door that doesn't open, but is meant to be opened by the soul. On the other side, presumably, lies the buried, or what remains. The door is carved with the name of the deceased, their titles, their family, their prayers. It's a resume, a love letter, a warning, a plea. You lean in. The surface is chipped, the edges worn, but you swear you feel breath pass through it, as if someone, long dead, has not stopped waiting for the morning offering. You realize something then, something cold and tender and inescapably human. This wasn't superstition. It was grief with structure. It was a way to say, I still remember you. You still matter. I'm still feeding you, even now. Because isn't that what we all want, in the end? To be remembered, to be missed, to be included in the world, even after we've left it. You look around the room again. It's no longer a relic. It's a kitchen of mourning, a chapel of quiet promises. And in its silence, you hear everything. The clink of ceramic bowls, the shuffling of sandal feet, the whispered names of the dead, spoken with cracked voices and reverent hands. You walk away slowly, and when you do, you leave behind not just the past, but a small part of your present. Your hunger, your ache, your longing, placed like an offering in the hope that someone, somewhere, still feels it. Because nothing escapes her gaze, not glory, not ruin, not even love. You return to the surface after hours, or was it days? Time, in Saqqara, folds like linen. You descend and ascend, but always remain somewhere in between. And now, above you, the night has returned. The air is cool, too quiet. The desert sighs like it's seen too much and remembers too little. But above it all, she waits. The moon, not full, not new, just present. She doesn't dazzle. She endures. A pale sentinel in a sea of bruised stars. Watching the necropolis below like a nursemaid, like a judge, like a tired god too old to intervene, but too loyal to look away. She's been watching since before pyramids rose, since before names had vowels, since before the dead had tombs. And she still watches now. You look around. To your left, the step pyramid, rising like a stairway no one ever finished climbing. To your right, the broken mastabas scattered like a family of collapsed shoulders. Behind you, The empty doorways that once meant everything. And beneath your feet, bones. Thousands of them. Kings, slaves, scribes, children, thieves who died rich, pharaohs who died begging for eternity. They're all here, mixed, mingled, pressed into silence. You walk carefully, as if your footsteps might disturb them. Not because they'll wake, but because you're not sure you'd survive what they tell you if they did. Because what is a tomb, really? It's not just a place to hide death. It's a place to negotiate it. A space where the living try to rewrite the terms of mortality. You carve a name in stone. You paint your dreams on plaster. You build chambers inside chambers and place your lungs in jars with little gods on the lid. You try to become legible to time. But time, it doesn't read. It just waits. You sit down on a block of sandstone, still warm from the sun's farewell. Above you, the moon glows softly. She doesn't mock. She just observes. She watched Imhotep design pyramids before they were called that. She watched priests mummify cats and pretend not to weep. She watched tomb robbers dig by starlight and swear they weren't desecrating, just surviving. She's seen it all, and she says nothing, because that's her gift, her curse. To see and to remain silent. To witness without erasing. To illuminate without judgment. You lie back on the stone. Close your eyes. The desert hums. The stars press closer. And the moon hangs over you like a curtain drawn between this life and whatever comes next. You think about all the names you've read. All the doorways you've crossed. All the dust you carry now, tucked into your sleeves, your breath, your dreams. You came here for history. You found grief in architecture. You came for the past. You found your reflection. Because in Saqqara, the dead do not sleep. They wait. They wait for memory. They wait for reverence. They wait for someone to whisper, I see you. And tonight, under this watching moon, you did. You saw them. Not as gods. Not as myths. But as echoes with names. As hunger. As hope. And so, as your eyes drift closed and your heartbeat slows with the wind, you don't leave Saqqara. You simply join it. One more soul tucked gently beneath the gaze of the moon, who watches over bones. Forever.